concerned that your child may have autism? Are you the parent of an autistic child? Well, today we have an expert on the subject, not only from the medical or mental health approach, but from her personal experience. Let's dive into it. I'm Natty,
I'm Vita,
and
and
we
we're
are here
here
to
to
thrive.
thrive. Today, we're going to talk about autism. This is a subject that's getting a lot of attention, but I've heard so much information that contradicts itself, and I want to get some facts from an expert.
Well, according to the National Autism Association, autism now affects 1 in 36 children. Boys are 4 times more likely to have autism than girls. About 40% of children with autism do not speak. Autism greatly varies from person to person. The rate of autism has steadily grown over the last 20 years. Autism is the fastest growing developmental disorder, yet the most underfunded.
Now, as we stated at the beginning, we have Dr. Jennifer Del Valle. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Thank you. My Spanish is getting better. Dr. Devati is with us today. She's a clinical psychologist and autism expert, but also she's the mother of an adult with autism. Welcome, Dr. Devati.
Thank you for
I'll be
being here.
honest, Dr. Del Valle, I may slip up and call you Jenny
Of course, you
because
can. You have that
uh,
privilege.
yeah, for our viewers, Jenny and I went to college together for undergrad. And we're not going to say how many years we've been friends. We're just going to say we've been friends since college.
That's true.
And we're going to keep it that way.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Let me ask you, how did your interest in autism started before you had the personal experience of autism?
Correct.
Tell me about
When
that.
we were in Sagrado, which were our under college university, I took a class for special need students.
Okay.
It was called Decisional Child. So it was
Mhm.
focused on all kind of um, situation, mental illness that can affect the child development in school. And after that, we had a project that I did in a school, which was with kids on the autism spectrum. That was my first time I interacted. And later, I knew that it was going to be part of my life later on.
Right.
So it was a beautiful experience, and I was so intrigued, and I began to study more. But during my doctor's studies, I focused more on sexual abuse during childhood
Mhm.
experiences, and I'm focused more on trauma. So my expertise right now are both trauma and autism.
Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. I think it's great. What are some of the early signs that you noticed in your child um, that caused you concern?
Yes, the biggest one was regression, right? He was developing on target, he was doing beautifully, but then all of a sudden he lost all his verbal abilities. So he lost the words that he was developing. At 10 months, he had like 15 words that he was saying, and all of a sudden at 15 months, he stopped speaking for all.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was just having tantrums, having meltdowns, having very difficult time. Now I know it was just sensory issue, but at that time I didn't know what it was. So we asked our pediatrician, and he said, "No, don't worry, everything is gonna be okay. You know, guys are late bloomers, so he's gonna return to his normal self in a while." And that never happened. So after that, obviously I was not relaxed, I was not satisfied with his response, so I began to look more information. We didn't have Google at that time, so it was more asking to my professors because I was finishing my doctoral studies at that time. One of my professors and mentor, she worked with kids on the spectrum, and she told me, I think you should do an evaluation. Let's try it. And that I began the process. For that, he was already 2 years old. So we got him on time, and he got a lot of the services, what we call it in early intervention, which is one of the reasons he had such good response right now in his life. Because again, it's very, very important that early intervention. So one of my recommendation is never trust when somebody says everything will be okay. If you see something that is just getting into your gut and saying, you know
Mhm.
what, something wrong with my baby, don't wait. Just ask other people, keep asking. Now you have Google, so look onto the things that you are just seeing in your baby and look more, because the experience, even if it's not autism, if it's just a speech delay, it will be better if he gets services. The earlier, the better.
Yeah, it's kind of like trust that God instinct, that motherly instinct that says something's not right with my child.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
And again, many people told me, oh no, is that because you are just studying the DSM? In that time, it was the three, and you have all those things in your head. And it was like, I'm not crazy. I know something is wrong. He was
Or they
speaking,
tell
he was
you you're a first
talking.
time mom. Or they tell you you're a
Oh,
first
that's
time
another one.
mom.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So you're a first time mom. You're just freaking out over everything.
That's
Yeah.
true. And I heard that one a lot. So it's just trust your instinct.
Hmm.
Just it's better to be called like you are just freaking out, but
Hmm.
get the services he needs, because
Right.
something is happening. Something is not right. If he
Hmm.
changes in, and I'm using he once because my son is a boy, but also we know statistically that there are more prevalence in boys than in girls.
Correct.
So that's why I focus more when I talking about autism into boys. And now we have a difference, right? The symptoms that we can observe in a girl are quite different than the one we observe in boys. So
Tell me
that,
about that.
yes, most of the time, girls, and sorry, guys,
Hmm.
it's not something against the guys, but girls tend to imitate better, and they develop more the acquisition of skills by observing, right? In autism, that is impaired in most of the kinds. But when we are talking about girls, we have seen that girls can just interact more with other girls and stay there, even though they are quite quiet and they can be a little bit shy, but you can see them trying to interact with other kids. Guys tends to be a little bit more alone, and they try to not interact too much with the other kids. They show less interest. So
Hmm.
we are studying more the symptoms and the characteristics that we can see on the girls, and they are quite different, and that's why most of the time girls get the diagnosis, the official one, later on in life, because at the beginning, and I always explain this to the parents, it's easy to overcome challenges because we are running, we are doing stuff together, but we don't have that social interaction all the time. When
Right.
we get into school, elementary years, we're still running and playing, and it tends to be more uh, easy task in the social development. When we get into, I will say, third grade, then things begins to get complicated because you use more language,
Okay.
more the process of socialization is more sophisticated. So
Okay.
you're going to begin like she is not getting there, right?
Hmm.
And sometimes when it's very, very mild, we will not see it until she is in seventh grade, because
Wow.
now everything is more complicated.
Hmm.
Now we have different interests. The girls will be more into childish interest, not because she is childish, but is where she feels more comfortable. And the other girls are just getting interest in more makeup, more social interaction, is more into the boys, and this girl is like doesn't get in there because that doesn't call her attention. So she's still like into this naive process if you compare with the situation, the social thing, and she doesn't get the jokes, she doesn't get the double message and sarcasm, and that's the part when everything gets more complicated. And that's most of the time where we get to impact those girls, because in the process it's like, okay, she's playing with the other kids, she shows interest, or at least she's around, and I put it into quotes because she's around but she is not really interacting with the other kids, it's just near them. And then when everything gets more complicated is that we begin to see more characteristics.
So let me. So the fact that it tends to, first of all, it tends to affect boys more than girls.
Yeah.
But then with the girls, it's going to be detected later. You kind of miss that early intervention
Yeah.
with them. How does that make treatment for girls more complex?
It will depend of the presentation. The
Okay.
thing in autism is that everything is so unique for every child. So sometimes we will have children that can be more rigid, and they will need more intervention into develop that psychological flexibility to accept changes and not have a meltdown. Some of them have more presentation that is more dependent on the sensory issue, and then we need to focus more on the sensory part. So it's very important to see what is the real uh, target that we need to work with this child, because each of them is very, very difficult. Later we can see that again, because girls has a better outcome into getting into the social part than boys, and I think that is more because the way females are developed, right? Females tends to be more into community, more into that social interaction, friendship. Guys tend to be more lunar, and they tend to be always in competition with the other guys, and who is better, who does better, who achieved this, and it's all the time that difference that we can see. And then we can see a better interaction with girls, because again, the way we are as a human tends to help them to overcome many challenges, but sometimes they mask, they try
Mm,
to hide the characteristics to try to fit in, because again,
mm,
for girls fitting in into the group,
right.
especially in those pre-adolescence adolescence year, they are going to hide that. And the problem with that is that then we can have low self-esteem, more anxious, and depression, because they are trying, and the more they try, they don't fit in. So it gets more complicated because the emotional part now is more prominent.
It makes sense. I don't. I am learning a lot because just like you, when
Yes.
I was going through my schooling years, my focus was on child abuse and trauma.
Mhm.
So autism was not on my spectrum bearing the word. One of the things I want to hear about is the myths. Things like, and I don't, you might tell me if this is like vaccines cause autism or certain foods cause autism. I tell me about those myths that are very popular, but they are not scientifically true.
Exactly. One of the reasons, and actually I was part of those people that at the beginning thought it was the vaccine, right?
Okay.
Because when my child got his diagnosis, that was just in boom. And it was
Mm,
just the reason why everybody was trying to explain autism. Unfortunately, we have been studying autism for so many years, but we don't have a real cause. We cannot say like in Down syndrome, right, that is this
right.
chromosome. We have so many different uh, options for saying what caused this, right? But we cannot say is this only this. And one of the things I think, and this is my personal opinion, is
Mhm.
that most of the time when we have a regressive autism, like my child, they lose what they are doing, right? Is for that time that we begin with the vaccination. Okay,
Ah.
there's another possible answer. Some of the kids struggle with their gut health, and
Mm.
when they get the vaccination, everything gets out of synchronization, out of control, and it's just because of the gut health, not because of the
Of the autism.
vaccination. So
Right.
there are many possible reasons, but scientifically, we know that that is not a correlation to say it's caused because of vaccination, but be mindful that if your child has gut troubles, I have tummy issues, just be cautious in the way you do the vaccination, right? And
Okay.
there are some specialists that they recommended some guides into, okay, don't use a vaccination that is like 5 vaccine in one. Always
Okay.
be mindful that if it has been with a cold or something like that, give
Mhm.
at least 2 weeks to your gut to be healthy again. And we talk about the gut because most of the immune system is developed in our gut. So if the gut is wacky, our immune system is not going to be working properly. So that will be a mess for the child who gets vaccination in that process. So it will depend on every child. There are other child that have an history of allergies. So again, the
Mhm.
system is not working properly, right? We know that the allergies are a hyper reaction of the immune system to the environment or something in the environment or food.
Right.
So in that cases, we also need to be mindful to be clear that how are those allergies, because when we get a vaccination, it's a trigger for our immune system.
Right.
So that's something that is important to be mindful. Other things like food, again, food allergies. It's not that food causes autism, but food is what nourish our
Fuel for
brain.
them. Right.
If we don't have a proper reaction to what we are eating, most of the time our brain is not working properly because it
Right.
doesn't have the proper nourishment. It doesn't have all the building blocks for develop all the different stuff. I don't want to get it more complicated into more scientific jargon, but all
Right.
the juices that work in our brain, right, are not developing properly because they don't have the building block. So it's
Mhm.
all a chain, right? Our food gets into our mouth, get into our tummy, it gets broken. All the different vitamins, minerals got into our bloodstream, and that helps our brain to develop all the juices they need to develop. So when we don't have that working properly, we are going to be unbalanced. And it's not the food properly, it's that the food creates the allergy mess up your gut, the gut doesn't work properly, so your immune system is not balanced, your serotonin is not balanced because again,
Mhm.
serotonin is one of the most important juices that we have in our brain,
Yes. Yes.
and it develops in our gut. So if that's why many people call our intestine the second brain, because most
Mhm.
of the thing that the brain needs is developed in our gut. And if you have
Mhm.
a child that is prone into a gut problem, it's important to take care of that gut because again, his behaviors are going to be all up and down because
Mhm.
serotonin is not working properly, because the gut is not developing the serotonin well. So the brain cannot be on balance. And when our serotonin is our balance, so we are more anxious, we are more irritable, we are more depressed because, again, our brain juice need that in order to work properly.
Hmm. Do you have any
Okay,
questions?
that is, I'm just soaking this up
It's a
because
lot because, again, 20 years ago when I began this journey, we didn't know anything of this, right? We know little pieces, but as scientists begin to study more, little pieces by pieces, we can just figure out what is going on. Now
Right.
I'm more into study the sensory part of autism. And every time I study more about sensory uh, input, right? How our brain receives the information from light, from sound, from sense, uh, it gets complicated because my nervous system can find a scent that is just unpleasant for me. My nervous system can think, oh, I'm in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And your behaviors change. And it's
Right.
just because you smell something.
Right.
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 And if we add
Wow.
that into trauma, right,
Mm.
then it gets complicated. And why I'm bringing trauma? Because most of the kids on the autism spectrum are bullied all the time. And
Right.
bully is a trauma where
Mm-hmm.
the environment that is supposed to be safe for me, the school, now is just war. I feel all the time mistreated. I feel all the time pushing around. I don't feel acceptance. I feel rejected. So every time we force our kid to go into school, we are just putting them in an environment that is not welcoming. So they feel the world around me is danger, is not safe. And then the behaviors begin to get more explosive because he cannot say, hey, I don't like this school. This guy is bullying me. This guy doesn't want to play with me because they don't have that language. They don't
Right.
have that skill. And most of the time we trust because, and I know teachers are doing their best, but they
Right.
cannot be there all the time.
You
They
have
have
30 kids in a classroom. Mm-hmm.
exactly. So what happens out of the classroom, right? When they
Mm-hmm.
are in lunch, influence that reaction the kid is showing up in the school. But what we see is, oh, this kid is misbehaving. He's getting aggressive. But wait, what happened? Why? And then we add into the equation ABA, which is good intervention, but sometimes is not focusing on the real cause of the behavior problem. And
Can
then
you
we
define
are
ABA for our viewers that may have not heard that term?
ABA is applied behavior therapy, right? Which is just a psychological model that is developed to increase skills and develop some good behaviors. Let me put it that way. I'm just trying to keep it very simple.
So it's like a reinforcement type of treatment.
It is transforming, right? We
Okay.
develop a plan thinking, okay, this child needs to develop more self control and keep itself just seated all the time, right? But we study what happens before and after that behavior. We see when the child keeps getting up on the classroom and cannot be seated for 50 minutes. First,
Mhm.
depending on the age, depending on the social, on the sensory profile of these kids, maybe they cannot be 50 minutes seated there. They need to move every 5 minutes because his
Yes.
brain needs movement.
Right.
And the more we study how we learn, we discover that movement is extremely important for learning.
Mm-hmm.
So in the school model, we have the child must be seated, paying attention for 15 minutes, doesn't move from there, right? And sometimes developmentally, that's not possible for some child. And then we try to reinforce stay seated there, but the body is telling you, don't stay seated. I need movement because my brain doesn't know where it is. Because for my sensory profile, I need movement to identify where I am. Okay. And some intervention, which I understand because I have been doing it for a year, but now with the sensory profile, we are clear that sometimes we are asking these kids to do something that is impossible for them. And at the end, we are penalizing them because he's not
Mm-hmm.
getting the reward.
Right.
And then it's so confusing for the kid because he's trying, but I cannot perform what they are expecting from me. Then I'm a bad kid.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We are homeschoolers,
Good.
and I know that's not a possibility for every parent
Hmm.
for whatever reason. Do you think here's it's a kind of a double pronged question. Do you think that um, children with autism or neurodivergency do better in a homeschooling setting? Because even though as a homeschooler I know that the lack of socialization is a myth, because I am the Uber for a toddler. So I know homeschooling and lack of socialization is a myth. I am
Correct.
rarely home. He has a better social life than I do,
Hmm.
Yes.
but he does. I'm just the Uber. But when you're dealing with autism, which already affects your social life, and then you're having a homeschool um, scenario, um, how would that balance? How, I mean, is it better for learning? And would the parent have to make sure that there are even more social exposures, or how would that work if
Well,
they are able?
again, it depends on the kid and the family.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, for the social part, right?
Hmm.
Homeschool tends to be more safe
Mm-hmm.
because
Hmm.
most of the time, families that are doing homeschooling,
Hmm.
their the development of the kid is very different than those kids that are on school.
Hmm.
So they tend to be more welcoming.
Hmm.
They tend to be even more protective of this child that shows a difference, right, from the other kids. The other part in the learning process, because you can develop your homeschool based on the interest of the
Right.
child will have more interest in studying,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
different than regular curriculum that I need to follow this line and I need to do it this way. And even though we have special education that says that is individualized, that's a myth
Hmm.
because not all schools provide that individualization. And actually, in July, we had a report that shows that only 23 states in the whole United States are in good, right, response to the IDEA law, which means not all the states get into meet that criteria of good special education services.
Hmm.
Okay, and in my island, which is just a little piece of
Right.
of all this, is just more difficult for my families, right?
Right.
Because everything is more complicated in terms of services. COVID
Hmm.
messed up many things. So even
I
though
can
we
only
have
imagine.
many resources available because of telemedicine now, everything is
Hmm.
more complex in so many
Hmm.
ways because we don't have so many resources because many people have died because of COVID. So
Hmm.
many people retire before time because of COVID,
Hmm.
and now they have so many benefits that they don't want to come back. So there are many things going on that makes everything more complex for our kiddos. And now the waiting lists are just crazy. But
Hmm.
going back to homeschool, homeschool is a safe environment,
Hmm.
but the family needs to be aware of
Hmm.
what that kid needs in terms of sensory needs, how to add those sensory breaks into daily
Right.
activities. Because if I'm homeschooling, bringing school model into my house, then I'm going to be struggling
Right.
because I'm just asking the kid to be seated, asking the kid to write, asking the kid to memorize as a proof that he's learning. When you are free to unschool into your homeschool, the kid will perform better because will not have that stress.
Mm-hmm.
So it
That
will,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, because most of the time, most of the bad behavior, that behaviors that we don't like and we just classify as bad, is our kid telling, I'm too stressed out, but
Hmm.
nobody's get that message. Everybody get the message that you are disobedient, you are naughty, you don't stay seated, you, and we put so many labels on what we see, and we don't study what the brain is trying to say.
Hmm.
And we need to change that view, because
Yes.
again, it's not that ABA is extremely bad. There are kids that respond well to ABA, but not all the kids on the autism spectrum needs ABA. So it's important that we need to honor what each child presents and their needs and what is safety. Because again, I can promise the world to a kid, but if his nervous system think the environment is not safe, there's no learning,
Yeah.
there's no regulation, and then you're going to keep having many behavioral difficulties.
Right.
What advice do you have for parents who just found out that their children are on the autism spectrum?
First, learn about autism, find a support group,
Hmm.
because it gets lonely in the process. You are going to lose many friends that don't understand the time you will be doing into therapy and driving and going into IEP meetings, and you're going to lose those friends. But if you have a good support around your house, in your community, in your uh, village, as we call it usually, right? You're going to have new friends that understand what you are going through. And instead of telling, oh, your child is naughty, you should be more strict, you should do this with your kid, and they don't even have kids, you're going
Hmm.
to feel worse about your parenting skills. But if you begin to interact with these other ladies that knows what it is, a meltdown of 45 minutes, and you are pulling your hair because you don't know what is going on, what you did wrong that triggered this reaction, and you are clueless in the process, and you need somebody that says, honey, don't worry, that's, it's sensory. Let's learn from next time what could be a trigger. Let's study him. You are doing the best you can. It's way different on the mom and the dad. The
Mhm.
other part is get support for your marriage. It's very, very important because it's difficult. Forget who is the faulty one.
Mhm.
Okay, there's no way to see what chromosome is the wrong one, if it's Y or X. Forget about that. It's
Yeah.
just we are a team. How we can work together to get that kid the services it needs, the space we need as a couple, the space you need as a mom for you to have a time off to regulate yourself, to take care of yourself and
Hmm.
your mental health, because then we have the caretaker burnout that we need to prevent.
Yeah.
Because when we are taking care of a complex child,
Hmm.
we get burned out. We begin to develop anxiety. We begin to develop depression. So we need to take care of ourselves. We need now to be a team and work together. And that's the hardest part in the couple.
Hmm.
And you need support with the family. How I get the family into this mess. How I teach my family that is not my parental skills. It's just
Hmm.
because autisms require a different set of skills, so we can just provide the accommodations to this child, because accommodations are not only for school, are also for family, are also for church, are also for the community. So we need to provide to this child the best set of skills so he can grow up and where he can feel safe. Because if he doesn't feel safe, we are going to have more
Excuse
complex situations.
And I'm glad you mentioned church because that was going to be my next thing. One of the things that Thrive, this podcast focuses, is it does mental health, but it also within the faith community. And one of the things that we're lucky, we go to a church that recognizes that neurodivergent children need their own space. They have their own room with people who are trained in sensory issues and stuff. But I also know that's not the case everywhere.
Certainly.
In some people, there's certain communities of faith that may see those behaviors even as a spiritual issue
Correct.
instead of a medical issue, which would be in the detriment of the child because then they're not going to get the help. But you have churches, and I can tell you a quick story. Um, when Mason was like 18 months old, it's a very small church. They don't even have a children's ministry, and he was acting like a toddler does, and he has no conditions that we know of up to now, thank God. Um, and we were separated from the congregation because the toddler was acting out.
Hmm.
I know how I felt. Actually, that was the last day I went to that church. I can only imagine the mother of a child with neurodivergent issues where it's not like you could just push a bottle or give them a candy and calm them down, because this is not just a regular child having a normal behavior. This is their medical condition acting out. So how we can educate our communities of faith? Maybe the biggest churches have probably more resources to accommodate that, but a smaller church that may not have the facilities or the resources, at least to identify some of those situations so that they can make those parents and those families welcome in their churches.
Right. Right.
It's very difficult
Hmm.
because, again, when you are talking about matter of faith, you need to see how you see things.
Mm,
How is your conceptualization of autism? As
okay.
you said before, if you see it that is a spiritual constraint, right? Because X or Y thing,
Hmm.
and you need to have more faith, is going to be harder. And that's the part where the family needs to do a reality check.
Right.
Is this the community that will help me and myself to get the support we need in
Right.
order to grow in our faith
Hmm.
and in our parenting skills? Because,
Right.
again, when everybody is telling me is that you don't have enough faith, is that you don't have enough faith, then again I think about what the church does when it's cancer. Do you
Hmm.
tell the person you need to have more faith and you're going to be well? Well,
Hmm.
probably there are cases that happens, but there are cases that doesn't happen. And what happened with those cases? Are they being just punished by God?
Right.
Is that the God I want in my life?
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
So that's very important because we know that we have every spectrum in the faith
Hmm.
development, right?
Right.
And if I'm just thinking that God is just this judge that is all the time punishing their kids because they misbehave, it's
Right.
going to be very hard
Hmm.
because the kid will be acting out and showing behaviors in response of how afraid he is to that view.
Hmm. Hmm.
So even a neurotypical child will
Hmm.
be afraid of going to church that is telling you, oh, God is there to tell you that if you don't behave this way, you are going to hell.
Right.
Right.
So
Right.
how I teach that to a child?
Hmm.
So it's very important that we take the faith part with very, very sensible heart,
Hmm.
and the process of honoring our faith, but also honoring our child.
Right.
Hmm.
Because there are things that happens for a reason,
Hmm.
and in that process we need to figure out what we'll need as a support, right? At least for me, I know God is there to tell me, hey, watch out, you are getting into trouble. But at
Hmm.
the end, I know that if I mess up, I will learn from that, and I have a very merciful father that says, hey, I know you messed up, but let's do it better. I
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
forgive you, right? That's why we have repentance in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And we have grace and we have mercy. And we need to use all that in order to, okay, let me build myself up. Because if I just figure out that I'm going to mess up and I only gonna get punished, why I should get better? I'm
Right.
doomed already. I punished already, so my life is not gonna get better. So
Right.
it's very important that we are sensible, that we understand this is a medical process. And
Mhm.
I know the social part of neurodiversity is important, but we need to be clear that this is medical. So
Right.
this is not a behavioral issue just because my child doesn't behave good. Is
Mm-hmm.
that my child have autism, and
Mm-hmm.
because of autism, the way he understands the world is different. The way he reacts to all the sensory input is different. The way he behaves socially, because going into a community of faith is a social action,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
right? So we need to behave in a certain way, but in the time my child learns that, I need to understand his sensory profile. Because if
Right.
he doesn't tolerate sounds and my church is loud in music, I'm just
Mhm.
setting up my child to failure.
Mm-hmm.
Because as long as that chorus begin to sing, my child will go out of control. Not
Mhm.
because he's a bad child, not because
Right.
he's a possessed child, just because he cannot tolerate the sounds. And
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
sometimes it's just one instrument, one voice. So we need to understand what our child needs. And I love that more and more we have church that are getting into this message, and they
Mhm.
are preparing their staff to provide sensible support to these families
Mm-hmm.
and
Mhm.
understand the sensory profile. Because in a church that you have so many things, right? If I have a pastor that is too intense, very passionate about the message, and my child is sensible,
Mm-hmm.
he
Oh
will freak
yes.
out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important the way we choose our church family,
Mhm.
and sometimes we recur to move on to another new family. And
Mhm.
it
Right.
happens to me. So in a church that we were visiting when we moved from Puerto Rico to California, they have a good children ministry, but they were not ready to work with a special needs child.
Mhm.
So it was very difficult to
Mhm.
integrate him to the other children, to explain the other children. And it was more difficult because he didn't know the language. So it was the
Mhm.
language barrier, the sensory part barrier. I remember they did one of the services, they did the Jonah and the whale, and they bring
Okay.
this fishy scent into the
Oh.
classroom to simulate the whale belly experience, right? And that was just awful for my child, first because he's allergic
Oh.
to fish. So
Ah.
Mm-hmm.
even the scent of the fish tossed him into throw up mode because his whole
Wow.
body was rejecting that scent.
Right.
So he
Mm-hmm.
wanted to run away from that, and everybody was trying to hold him into that
Ooh.
service.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So can you see the picture? Why
Yes, I
it's
Yes.
so
can.
Yes.
important to be sensible? Obviously, that was our last day in there.
Okay.
I
Yes.
Yes.
had why I should submit my son into this horrible process.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's not that they are doing wrong in what they were doing for the children of the ministry, but they were not ready to interact with the children with sensory profile that is different from other children. So
Right.
it's important that as a parent we become flexible and we give our children the best opportunity, because I want my children to have a good experience with God.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
But if I take my child to a place that their needs are not supported, how I
Mhm.
can explain my children or my child that God love you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's a very contradictory message. If I
Hmm.
just tell you, oh, God make you perfect, God love you, and I'm just putting you into hell
Right. Right.
because you don't tolerate the music, but I force you to be there because you need to be there and you cannot move. And all your system is telling you, run for your life. This is
Yes.
not
Yes.
possible to be here.
Yes.
And I telling you,
Yes.
no, 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 don't run. If you run, you don't have ice cream tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we do it out of love, right?
Mm-hmm.
We as a parent feel that we are judged all the time.
Oh yes.
So in the process, we know that if he misbehaves, somebody is waiting for me outside to tell me, your
Mm-hmm.
child misbehaves today. You should do better next time.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's a dual process. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just the child. It's how I feel as a mom. Do I feel supported or do I feel judged all the time?
Mm-hmm.
So it's important that we find a community that support you
Yes.
as a parent
Yes.
and support your child because again everything happens for a reason. There's
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
no thing, no thing, nothing bad in this child. He's
Mm-hmm.
perfect the way he is. Why we want to change it?
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Awesome.
difficult for family. It's difficult because
Yeah.
again, as a family, you feel that because this diagnosis arrived into my family, now I'm losing everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'm losing friends that doesn't want to come because my child gets undressed in front of everybody because
Right.
Mm-hmm.
sensory he doesn't like the way uh, the clothing feels. So I need to
Mm-hmm.
get rid of this because it's like putting a t-shirt with needles
Straight
into it.
jacket. Yeah.
Yes.
No,
Yes.
no, it feels awful because it's painful for them. So
Mm.
Yes.
it is painful. So uh, that texture into the skin is very sensible. If you do this in your hand, you feel good. If you did it roughly, it feels bad. So for
Right.
them, that texture feels really, really bad, and they need to get rid of it because again, their sensory reaction is telling their nervous system, you are in danger, this is not good.
Mm-hmm.
So you are triggering the protection reaction. So your
Um,
brain goes into protection mode, which we call it fight or flight.
Firefly.
Yeah, I call it protection mode because the reaction is to protect. So
Right.
I don't want to fight, but I need to fight in order to defend my life. So that's the
Right.
reaction of the system, right? And I learned this from trauma, and now we are using it more into the part of autism. But the reaction is just there to protect yourself. It's not that
Mm-hmm.
to make you naughty, it's that your
Right.
brain cannot handle this situation. So there's no way I can force you to stay there unless I help you to develop those skills that will help you to regulate and teach your system, hey, calm down. There's no danger right now. I'm safe. And that's a process.
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm.
But most of the time, we teach the kids, you should behave, you should do better. And the kid doesn't know what the heck they need to do better. I'm
Right.
trying my best.
Mm-hmm.
But what we see is he's not because we are not inside of them. We
Mm-hmm.
cannot feel what they are feeling.
Right.
We imagine and we try to, but because we are also triggered as a mom, like my mom's skills are not good because I'm not going to get this kid under control. Well, guess what? You never controlled your kid when he was into your belly. He moved whenever he wanted. He made you pee whenever he wanted. So
Right.
Right.
he was inside of you and you cannot control it. How do you pretend to control it now?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to learn how to help them to develop those skills. And most of the time, when we use punishment, when we use reinforcement, sometimes we forget that we are pretending that they get those skills out of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We need to teach them those skills. We need
Right.
to teach them how to stay still but relaxing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
breathing, telling your system, hey, I appreciate that you're telling me I'm in danger, but in reality, I'm not in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We can trust these people. We can trust this place. We can try this time and accept mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the learning process, we do mistakes. But what school teach us about mistake
Oh, you're not supposed to make it or you're in trouble.
and how you are learning without mistakes?
Right.
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 It's not possible. So, as a
Right.
children, we, the adults, learn that mistakes are bad because everybody mark it on red. So, see
Mm-hmm.
it big there. You are a failure because you did a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody teach us that mistake is part of learning. So, when
Right.
we see our children making a mistake, that response gets into our head. I'm a failure as a mom because my children was learning, but he learned and he made a mistake. Yes, we learn and we make mistakes. So it's not that what you were teaching was wrong. It's
Mm-hmm.
that it's part of the learning process. I tried, I do better, I made mistake. Oh, we reinforce what we did before. Let's practice again and let's keep practicing
Mm-hmm.
because it's the only way we learn as a human.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
So there are a lot of mixed messages that family needs to work out.
Mm-hmm.
Myself as a mom, with those triggers of my nervous system, because again, mistakes are a trigger for adults
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
we put together mistake failure. I cannot make a mistake as a mom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that gets into the middle process of how I support my kid.
Doctor, we thank you so much, and we are so grateful that you took time out to share your expertise, um, to share your views, and to share this important information with us. I've learned so much.
I'd have to. I have to say, I think that the biggest takeaway for me was um, early detection is the most important thing as long as it's possible. Um, I think for me, I've learned, even though we don't have an autistic, there's not an autistic child over here, as a parent. So some of the things you said apply to raising children in general.
Correct. Correct.
Because, like you said, not only the school system, but society teaches us
Mm-hmm.
that you make mistakes, you're disposable. You
Mm-hmm.
got to be out of the
Correct.
way. We
Right.
can't do anything. So even to me as a parent makes me think, I have to admit, I do the bribing. If you sit here for a little bit, you get some ice cream or some candy. But is that actually teaching them why they need to sit there or whatever? So it's a lot to process. But I think the great thing about this interview is that not only has helped us with autism as a subject,
Yes.
but in terms of parenting and instead of as a community, on how to help those families around us with special needs.
Mm-hmm.
So I am so, so grateful that you took the time for
Oh,
us today.
yes.
My pleasure. Always here to help. And again, it's important that we are clear that we are all learning.
Yes.
Hmm.
Parenting is a new skill that most family are learning in the process of doing.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's even though we got parenting classes in high school, it's not the same to be there with
No.
the
It's not.
kid. And so
No.
be just gentle to yourself. Be
Mhm.
mindful that is a learning process. Be merciful with yourself when you made a mistake and just do better next time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
And I'm going to take you on the offer that you're going to come back.
yes,
Next time, we're going to talk about autism in adults.
yes.
Yes.
So we will have you back soon.
Just let me know. Just let
Yeah.
me know.
And
It's a pleasure to be here. And adulthood is another journey, which is
oh, I am so
very,
curious.
very interesting. So just can't wait that we can talk about it.
Thank you so, so much,
My
Thank you,
Jamie.
pleasure.
doctor.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Nice to
Have
meet
a
you.
Bye.
great day. Bye bye. Please share with us your questions, your thoughts, and experiences on this topic. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel.
And until next time, don't
Don't
forget
forget
to
to
thrive.
thrive.
Have a great day.
Bye bye.
Bye.